So GE is planning to break up their conglomerate, which, we've all been sort of talking about the good old days of GE, right, and how they've really changed, especially recently. But they're going to officially break up and no longer be this big conglomerate. They're going to go into 3 separate companies. So their healthcare business will be one, and then they will combine renewable energy, their fossil fuel power, and digital units into a second. And then their GE Aviation and their jet engine division will be the third spinoff. So, Alan, I mean, how do you feel like this is going to affect GE going forward? Is this the right move?
Well, when I saw the announcement, it was like mind blown. Like, what is happening in the world? It's almost surreal, right? Oh yeah, end of 100 years of dominance in so many different areas that it's hard to conceive, right? Because GE was in light bulbs, they were in jet engines, they were in plastics, they were in power distribution, they were in generators, now they're in wind turbines, they were in healthcare, they were in insurance, they were in financing, they were in leasing, they were in all aerospace, right? And they were making satellites, which I used to work in. They were in every conceivable industry, making washing machines, making refrigerators. That to now break it down to only 3 sectors, making jet engines, making renewable energy, wind turbines, and power generation systems. And then what's the other one? Healthcare. Yeah, so that's what's left after all of that. And it really, what the precipice for it was insurance. That the insurance business and the finance business cost that company so much money. They could never really recover from the losses. It could never offload those losses because no one would take them. And so I think it has a couple of things to learn from. First of all, every company is vulnerable. Every company is vulnerable, and you have to be diligent all the time. There is no company, especially in renewables, that can rest on the laurels at this point. GE did it for a while and has paid a really expensive price for it. The second part, I think, is that you have to continue to evolve. And GE has kind of taken the position years ago when I worked there of you're either number 1, number 2, or you're gone. Well, that's really hard to do. When GE made locomotives, they were number 2. Well, they sold it, right? So they were not number 1 in appliances. They sold it. So you have this attrition of yourself that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. It may bring some stockholder value in the short term, but it's not in the long term. That's for certain. And so there's so many nuances to this because you're talking about a company that employed probably a significant portion of the U.S. population at some point. It's kind of like Ford or General Motors. Like there was probably 100, well, there had to be more than 100,000 employees. There's probably 300,000 at one point. That sort of shift, a market shift, or something that we really needed to take in consideration and realize as a country, is that good? Obviously evolving is good. Having better markets is good. But there's some sort of imbalance here, and maybe GE took too many risks. Now they're paying the consequence for it. That how does? And I'll give you the example. SpaceX. Is SpaceX around 20 years from now? Tesla, right? I think the companies we think are invincible now: Facebook, Amazon, SpaceX, Tesla, Google. Are they around 20, 30, 40 years from now? Maybe, maybe not. But as an economy evolves, those are really tough periods, right? America is, in a sense, losing its industrial base. And I'm not sure, even if you're looking from the outside in from Australia, I'm not sure that's a good place for the world to be.
Well, this is obviously the work of Larry Culp, the CEO, and he's done a good job trimming a lot of their debt since he took the helmet in 2018, sorry. And he sold off a lot of those other businesses, right? He's like, look, we don't need this. Yep. We're going to offload this stuff. And I think that actually is kind of a parallel to another thing that happened here in the U.S. with Amtrak. And so when you talk about the shining good old days of GE, it seems like they had a lot of CEOs along the way that continued to hold that shiny view of it. Like, we don't want to break up what GE was. which was maybe to its future detriment, right? And now Mr. Culp seems to have been like, look, we're going to do what needs to be done. We're not going to live in the past anymore. Whether that ends up being the right move or not. And that's a similar thing that actually happened, it seems like, with Amtrak. Amtrak has had a lot of routes that have been very unprofitable, and in part because they've always had CEOs that were within the company that rise up and sort of had this what the railroad system is supposed to be, like what Amtrak should be, rather than doing what was maybe best for Amtrak. And then the former Delta CEO took the helm at Amtrak recently, and he's like, look, he didn't have that shiny feeling about what Amtrak used to be. He's like, look, I'm going to make this profitable, and I'm going to make hard decisions that maybe other CEOs didn't want to make because they had, again, this sort of shiny view of what Amtrak always was. And it seems like he's done a great job as well, as a side note, of making Amtrak a lot closer to being a profitable company, whereas they'd floundered for a long time. So, Rosemary, what's your take on GE? I know from the investing side, you find it problematic when they're so sort of sprawling because you put your money in and it might be investing in something you don't necessarily want it to. So how do you feel about this breaking up into three separate entities?
Well, to me, it makes sense. I mean, I've always found it a bit strange how many pies GE had their fingers in, so to speak. I've actually just recently started a rewatch of 30 Rock, and the first time that I watched it, I had never worked at GE, and now it's actually adds a real extra layer. It's very clever. A very clever take on GE culture. And I know I just watched an episode where Alec Baldwin's character, I think it's Jack Donaghy, comes in and he's the VP of TV and microwave programming, or I can't remember the wording, but yeah. And it's just like, I mean, they did have a TV station at one point, and they did have like all these just kind of ridiculous things. And people would say to me when I was working there, but like, what does GE do? And I'm like, oh, well, I guess for the most part it's turbines, but then also healthcare and it was finance. And, like, it's kind of hard to see where the synergies are between all those businesses. And I do think that the really big company, I mean, there's benefits and you can save money by not duplicating things. That's good. But it comes in with a lot of extra bureaucracy as well. And bureaucracy is, like, really a killer for innovation. You need to keep your bureaucracy lean and targeted if you want to keep on innovating. So I do think that companies shouldn't be bigger than they need to be to get those synergies. So from that point of view, and, having worked in the company, I can see the strength of this strategy. And I was, saying before we started recording, I was saying I was a bit surprised to see, or maybe disappointed to see that the energy, it's still got renewables and fossil fuel energy together, because, I mean, for me personally, I wasn't that thrilled when LM got bought by GE, and now I work for a company that makes money off fossil fuels. I know other people in the company thought that, including, some reasonably high-level executives. As an investor, I don't want to invest in fossil fuels, not just because I don't believe in it, but because I know that it's going nowhere. Like in 50 years' time, there's not going to be any of these companies aren't going to be profitable. So, yeah, I think maybe later on we'll see them split again, and we have seen some other companies split like that, take the fossil fuels away from the renewables. So anyway, I know Alan disagrees, so Alan, tell me what you think about that. No,
I really don't disagree at all. I think that's a really good take on it. And I do think there is a need for every country to have to do the heavy lifting. You're going to need massive organizations to do it. To build trains, to build aircraft, to build automotive complexes, to put up massive buildings. There's just a certain amount of structure you need around that. And when you lose an organization that could do that, like GE built tanks, right? Or designed all kinds of things that you just don't hear about on the street. When you lose that sort of large industrial capability, that's not a positive for your country. And I think we've gone through a couple cycles of this, from Sun Oil to the railroads to steel to you name it in the United States, and all those have been very painful. The backsides of those have been very painful, and losing a GE is, on one hand, it brings new life. There's new energy in other places, right? Instead of, you're right, having a huge bureaucracy like GE is definitely a negative, and they had a huge bureaucracy. Don't think that they didn't. But on the other hand, you as a country are limited on things you can do. And that's where it takes a little bit of balance. And I'm not sure we're quite in balance at the moment.